Welcome, curious minds. Take a moment, just think about your own inner world right now. Those thoughts, the feelings that bubble up, maybe sudden impulses. Do you ever feel completely in control? Or does it sometimes seem like they've kind of got a mind of their own?
It's a really common feeling, isn't it? That sense of, well, who's driving the bus inside?
hmm
Or maybe sometimes feeling like no one is.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what we're diving into today on the deep dive. We're going to take a fascinating journey into the really complex relationship between your mind and your brain.
Yeah. And we're drawing heavily today from Jeffrey Schwartz's incredible book, The Mind and the Brain. It really tackles this head on.
Right. So our mission really is to unpack this puzzle that's been around for ages. Is your mind just like the brain's software and output?
Or does it have its own power? Like
Yeah.
actual causal power to shape your physical reality, even, change the brain's wiring itself.
And this isn't just abstract philosophy, is it? We're going to explore what this means for you, how this impacts treating things like mental disorders, how we think about free will.
And even just how your day-to-day attention, where you put your focus, actually shapes who you become.
Yeah, get ready for some surprising stuff, maybe some aha moments that could really shift how you think about yourself and, well, your brain.
Definitely.
So let's start with Dr. Schwartz's own story. He got really uncomfortable with the standard treatments for OCD, obsessive-compulsive disorder. Why was that?
Well, the dominant approach back then, exposure and response prevention, it bothered him deeply. He felt it was based almost totally on animal behavior research.
Animal research. For human OCD.
Exactly. It basically treated humans as, in his words, brutes. It kind of ignored the conscious experience, the thoughts and feelings that make us, human.
That sounds, yeah, incredibly limiting. So
Yeah.
he wasn't buying that behaviorist view. What did he do instead? What was his alternative?
He was really determined to find a better way, something that didn't force patients into what he saw as ridiculous or even unsanitary actions, just to confront the fear. His big realization, his epiphany, was that you had to engage the patient's mind, their mental abilities.
Engage the mind itself.
Yes. And this led him, actually pretty early on, like during medical school, to look into things like yoga and Buddhist mindfulness meditation, which was pretty radical back then.
Wow, yeah, a huge departure. And that really connects to this bigger philosophical problem, doesn't it? The whole mind-brain problem.
Absolutely. We've gotten pretty good at mapping things, right? Like knowing which part of the brain lights up when you recognize a face or feel happy. Wilder Penfield's work in the 50s was key there.
Okay.
But there's still this persistent explanatory gap. Knowing where something happens in the brain doesn't explain how that physical activity actually becomes a subjective feeling and experience.
Ah, okay. So a map of brain activity for pain isn't the feeling of pain?
Precisely. A neural state isn't the same thing as a mental state. The mind seems distinct, even if it obviously depends on the physical brain. It's like
Hmm.
trying to explain the wetness of water just by describing H2O molecules. There's something missing.
That makes sense. So if the brain isn't the whole picture, how have people tried to bridge that gap? What are the main ideas?
Well, you've got a few camps. There's materialism, which basically says there is no separate mind. It's all just matter. The brain is the mind.
So no gap to bridge because there's only one side.
Kind of, yeah. There's this funny thought experiment, about aliens studying humans. One asks, what does the thinking? The other says, the brain, the meat thinks. And the first one's like, thinking meat. You expect me to believe in thinking meat.
Thinking meat. I like that. It captures the core idea, nothing but the physical stuff.
Exactly. Then you have epiphenomenalism. This one admits, okay, yes, consciousness is real. You have thoughts and feelings.
Okay.
But it says they have zero effect on the physical world. They're like steam rising from a train engine. Real, but they don't make the train go.
So the mind is just a shadow. It can't do anything.
Right. It's causally impotent. The brain causes the mind, but the mind causes nothing. The arrow only points one way. But then you have thinkers like David Chalmers. He argues for something called non-reductive ontology of consciousness.
Okay, that's a mouthful. What's the gist?
The gist is, you can't just reduce consciousness down to brain bits. It's not just a complex physical process. He argues that even if you knew everything physical about the universe, you still wouldn't automatically understand subjective experience. There's always going to be this fundamental gulf between the physical and the mental.
A persistent gap. Okay, so if the mind might be more than just brain activity, let's look at the brain itself. Just how changeable is it? Let's talk about neuroplasticity.
Right, neuroplasticity, it's this amazing ability the brain has to rewire itself, basically, to forge new connections, prune old ones, even change what different areas do.
And this is a relatively new idea, isn't it? Didn't people used to think the adult brain was fixed?
Oh, absolutely. The famous neuroanatomist Ramon y Cajal said back in 1913 that the adult brain's pathways were fixed, ended, immutable. Game over after childhood, essentially.
Right.
But then Donald Hebb came along in 1949 with his postulate. Cells that fire together, wire together. That was huge.
Fire together, wire together. What does that mean practically?
It means if two brain cells are active at the same time, the connection, the synapse between them, gets stronger. It's like, walking the same path over and over makes a deeper trail. It's fundamental to learning and memory.
And we see this happening all the time, right? Like how a baby's visual system actually gets wired up properly by the act of seeing.
Exactly. It needs that input. Or think about kids born deaf. Their auditory cortex, the part that should process sound, doesn't just sit idle. It often gets repurposed, maybe for processing visual information or sign language.
So it takes on a new job.
It does. In your sense of touch, the map of your body and your somatosensory cortex, that map gets refined through experience. Areas you use more get more detailed representation.
Okay, so the brain is definitely dynamic, which brings us to a pretty controversial story. The silver spring monkeys in the 70s.
Yes, Edward Taub's experiments. They were ethically very difficult.
Yep.
He performed surgery on monkeys to cut the sensory nerves from one arm differentiation.
Why? What was he studying?
He wanted to study learned non-news, basically.
Yep.
How an animal stops using a limb, it can't feel, even if the motor nerves are fine, the limb just hangs there.
Okay.
But then he tried to force them to use the numb limb. He'd restrain their good arm, sometimes even use electric shocks as negative reinforcement.
Oof. Yeah, I can see why that blew up. Animal cruelty charges, the rise of the animal rights movement.
It was a huge flashpoint, but scientifically. The takeaway was undeniable, despite the methods.
What was that takeaway?
It was the first really solid proof of massive plasticity in the adult primate brain. It shattered that old idea of a fixed, immutable cortex after a certain age.
So even though the experiments were ethically awful, they showed the adult brain could undergo huge changes.
Yes. And later, that basic finding helped develop therapies for humans, like constraint-induced movement therapy for stroke patients, which can help rewire the brain and regain function even years later.
Incredible. So after Taub, others like Michael Merzenich and John Kaz kept exploring this.
They did. They studied owl and squirrel monkeys and found the brain maps of their hands differed a lot depending on how they used them.
Right.
But the really wild experiment,
Go on.
they surgically sewed two fingers of some monkeys together
What? Why?
to see what the brain would do. And after a few months, the brain areas that used to represent those two separate fingers had merged. They became one single representation in the cortex.
The brain redrew its own map because the body changed.
Exactly. And they saw the reverse in humans born with fused fingers. After surgery to separate them, the brain quickly created distinct maps for each newly independent finger.
That is just mind-bending.
It is. And it wasn't just touch. George Rekinzone did similar work with hearing. He trained monkeys to pay close attention to specific sound frequencies. And the areas in their auditory cortex dedicated to those specific, behaviorally relevant frequencies got much bigger, several times bigger than in control monkeys.
So it's not just learning a new fact, it's changing the brain's actual layout.
Precisely. This neuroplasticity isn't just a fancy word for learning. It's, as Schwartz puts it, a wholesale remapping of neural real estate, like rezoning prime land for a completely new purpose.
Okay. The brain is incredibly plastic. It can physically change based on experience. Now, the million-dollar question, can we, using our minds, direct that change? Can our will rewire our brain?
That's the core of Schwartz's work with OCD patients. He believed, yes, you absolutely can. His 4 steps method was designed to empower patients to do exactly that.
Okay, let's break down those steps. What did he have patients do?
Right, so the first step is relabel. Recognize that intrusive thought or urge, I need to wash my hands again. Recognize it as a symptom of OCD. It's not you, it's the disorder.
Detach from the thought.
Exactly. Step 2, reattribute. Understand why it's happening. Attribute it to the underlying cause, a brain glitch, as he put it, aberrant messages from a faulty circuit. He'd literally tell patients, the brain's going to do what the brain's going to do, but you don't have to let it push you around.
Okay, so name it. Understand it's the brain, not really me. What's next?
Step 3, refocus. This is the really active part, the hardest part. You have to willfully shift your attention away from the OCD urge and onto something else, something adaptive and constructive.
Like instead of washing, go do some gardening.
Perfect example. Deliberately engage a different healthy circuit. It takes real effort, real will and courage, as Schwartz said. He had this one patient who just decided, this winter, no more washing compulsions. I'm done with raw, cracked hands. I'd rather be dead. And he did it. He refocused.
Wow, that's powerful. But this idea of conscious mental effort changing the brain, it bumps up against scientific determinism, right?
Yeah.
The whole my genes made me do it or my brain chemistry is fixed idea.
It definitely does. How can sheer will change biology if everything is just cause and effect, atoms bumping into atoms? This got tangled up with Benjamin Libet's experiments in the 80s.
Ah, Libet. I've heard of those. Didn't they show brain activity before people felt like they decided to act?
They did. He found these readiness potentials, like a ramp-up of brain activity that started before the person consciously felt the intention, the urge to flick their wrist or whatever the task was.
So does that mean free will is an illusion? That our brain decides before we do?
Well, that was the initial interpretation by many.
Mm.
But Libet himself didn't actually conclude that. He had a more nuanced view later on.
Okay. What was his take?
He suggested that, yes, the initiation of an action might start unconsciously. That readiness potential might be the brain preparing a possible action, an urge bubbling up.
Right.
But he proposed that conscious will still had a role to play as a gatekeeper. It might not start the action, but it could veto it. You could consciously decide not to act on the urge.
Ah, free won't, rather than a free will.
Kind of. You have the power to consent or to block the action. And this actually fits with brain science, showing the prefrontal cortex is crucial for exactly this kind of inhibition, for choosing between options, for willed acts. Damage that area, and people can become almost automatic, just reacting to stimuli.
Okay, so maybe will isn't initiating, but it's steering or stopping. But we're still left with how. How does the non-physical mind, through attention or will, actually influence the physical brain? This sounds like where things get weird.
They do get weird because classical physics, Newtonian physics, doesn't really have room for mind influencing matter like that. But quantum physics, that's a whole different ballgame.
Quantum physics, okay, deep breath. How does that fit in?
Well, quantum mechanics describes the world at the tiniest scales, atoms and particles. And down there, things don't work like billiard balls. Observation plays a crucial role. The act of measuring or observing actually influences the outcome. It chooses which possibility becomes reality.
Like the double slit experiment?
Exactly. You fire single particles, like photons, at two slits. If you don't watch which slit they go through, they act like waves and create an interference pattern, as if each one went through both slits at once.
Both at once?
Yeah. It exists as a superposition of possibilities. But the moment you measure which slit it goes through, poof, it acts like a particle again and just goes through one. The observation collapses the waves of possibilities into a single actuality.
Okay. My brain hurts a little. How does that relate to my brain deciding whether to wash my hands or go garden?
Right. So physicist Henry Stapp proposed a hypothesis. He looked at synapses, the connections between neurons. Specifically, the release of neurotransmitters often depends on the flow of calcium ions.
Okay.
At the quantum level, the movement of those tiny ions isn't strictly determined. It's probabilistic. So Stapp suggests a brain state, like deciding to release a neurotransmitter or not, might exist momentarily as a quantum superposition, a mix of release and don't release.
A superposition of brain possibilities.
Exactly. And Stapp argues that the mind, through focused attention or mental effort, acts like the observer in the double-slit experiment. It can influence which of those possibilities becomes actual.
So my attention selects the reality.
In a way, yes. This relates to something called the quantum Zeno effect. Basically, the idea is that by repeatedly focusing your attention, rapidly observing a particular mental state or intention, you can hold that state in existence, increasing the probability that the associated neural action occurs.
Like keeping a quantum pot from boiling just by watching it.
That's the analogy. You keep focusing on the garden thought, you hold that pattern active, making it more likely that the neural circuits for gardening fire, rather than the circuits for washing.
So, back to the OCD patient choosing gardening over washing.
Okay, so the urge to wash is strong. That circuit is probably firing away, creating a high probability of washing. But the patient exerts mental force, focuses attention intensely on the gardening thought.
Applying the quantum Zeno effect.
Right. They are mentally holding the garden pattern, increasing the probability that neurotransmitters get released in that circuit. This makes the action of gardening more likely to happen.
And then, because of neuroplasticity.
Exactly. That willed action, driven by focused attention, strengthens the garden circuit through Hebb's rule wire together. So, The next time, the probability of choosing gardening might be a little higher. You are literally using your mind, your will, your attention to reshape the physical structure and probability landscape of your brain.
Wow. Okay, so we've really gone on a journey here.
Right.
From behaviorism, seeing people almost like machines,
Right, the brute idea.
to realizing the brain is incredibly adaptable, neuroplastic,
Constantly changing, remapping itself.
and landing on this pretty radical idea backed by quantum physics that our conscious mind, our focused attention, might actually be the force that directs that change, a directed mental force.
It's a powerful concept. And think about what that means for you listening right now. If your mind really can influence your brain's physical structure.
Then your choices, where you consciously place your attention, they aren't just side effects. They're potentially active forces shaping your brain.
Yeah, it really pushes back against that feeling of being just an automaton, a slave to your genes or your brain chemistry.
It does. And maybe that explanatory gap we talked about, the mystery of how mind relates to brain. Maybe it's not just that we don't understand the mind well enough.
What if we don't fully understand the matter of the brain itself? What if quantum effects aren't just noise, but are actually fundamental to how mind interacts with brain?
It opens up huge possibilities, doesn't it? For personal agency, for maybe even healing, for overcoming challenges. If the mind truly can change the brain, what does that power really mean for us?
That's definitely something worth thinking about long after this conversation ends.